Welcome to Unveiling Death. I'm Rabbi Jeffrey Weil. The following is the first podcast of Unveiling Death. As you will hear, it was called Death Pod at that time. And my guest is my dear friend, Gary Spruch. Gary is a serious student of Judaism, of the writings of French Jewish philosopher Emmanuel Levinas, and of religion generally. Gary and I conducted this conversation the same way we conduct our frequent phone conversations. It was wide-ranging and fun. Enjoy. Okay, Spruch. So, you're going to a wedding. Somebody's getting married.
I haven't been to a really joyful wedding in a while, actually. Of course, I've read a lot about, or something about the similarity between weddings and funerals. Just came to my mind in relation to Death Pod.
Tell me about that.
Oh, just that I guess anthropologists and others have, noticed so many similarities in customs and rituals, and they've spoken about how a wedding, a marriage is a death on many levels,
Mm-hmm.
in the most positive sense.
Okay.
But yet a transition.
Yeah. I know about like sex being like death,
Yes.
the release of something, the loss of something even. But I'm not sure. I guess I understand how a wedding could be like death because it's the end of something, life as you knew it. But I don't know. I don't understand. I don't know anything more than that.
Oh, yeah. It's the end of a very a certain type of freedom, and
Mhm.
entering into a new,
Mhm.
very different sort of freedom.
Yeah.
But
Right.
when you mentioned sex, or the relation between sex and death, I just want to add that I remember a great teacher saying, always comparing death to sex and meditation. And when he spoke about why people dread meditation, why people build libraries of meditation books but never
But
meditate.
don't meditate. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Are interested in the subject for decades but don't meditate.
Mhm.
He said because meditation is a small death and people are just mortified of it.
Right. Interesting. Right. So in terms of the sex part, you do lose some life, right? I mean, you sort of expend some life-giving stuff, like literally. When you have sex, like an orgasm, it's like gone. There's a little bit of life in you that just disappears. But in terms of the meditation, then it makes me also think about like drugs, like hallucinogens, psychedelics. And is that could sort of be like a little death as well. If meditation is, then maybe a psychedelic experience would be as well. You know the song She Said by the Beatles? She said, I know what it's like to be dead. I know what it is to be sad, and you're making me feel like I've never been born. It's on Revolver.
Mm-hmm.
That She Said is Peter Fonda, actually a he. It's a John Lennon song. And apparently, if I remember correctly, it's Peter Fonda on like an acid trip saying, I know what it's like to be dead, like through that acid trip, understanding death, understanding the that I don't know, through acid, having a taste of the whatever I was going to say afterlife, but that sounds too traditional and kind of like quaint. But like, I don't know, maybe the oblivion of it. Like sometimes people talk. I read an article once about that licking of the frog thing. Do you know about that? In
No.
like Latin America, some like in the jungle, where there's a certain frog and you lick the frog.
Hallucinogenic.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
You used to lick it. I think you lick its belly or something like that. And the way this one journalist was describing it, it was like he disappeared. He just completely entered oblivion. Um, and and yeah, so I guess anything that takes you out of, well, what? I guess that's the question. Or like with meditation, That's the question. Anything that takes you out of, anything that makes you go from what to what, like what's that? What's the thing that happens?
Well, when you were talking about sex and you said kind of like some type of a loss of life or something, but it seems to me that it's really the orgasm that can be take perhaps for a few moments take one out of the locked in ego consciousness,
Mhm.
um, such as meditation and perhaps psychedelics.
Right, right, right. So does that mean that do you think that when is there no ego when we die? Do we think that there's no more ego when we die? There's no more self?
I certainly can't. It's hard to imagine an ego
Hmm.
after death.
Okay. So um so then this whole like the whole ghost idea, right? Or even in like in Second Samuel or King, I don't remember, Kings with the Witch of Endor and Samuel, prophet, judge, prophet, kingmaker Samuel being summoned from the dead place, which in the Bible is Sheol, which is a just dark, murky, Hades kind of place where everyone goes, the righteous, the unrighteous, everyone goes there. And
Hmm.
he comes back and he's agitated because Saul, the first king, had had summoned him through the Witch of Endor from the place of the dead, and he was like sleeping, and he's like, "Who's disturbing my sleep?" So those ideas, both the and they're kind of similar. The ghost idea, where they're like around, and they're like just doing things, and they're
Mm.
angry or like whatever, um, ticked off for having to be dead or trapped or whatever, and the whole and that story of the idea of Sheol and of the story of Samuel, it seems like they have egos in both of those
Hmm.
situations.
Hmm.
What do you make of that?
I see. I see. It strikes me maybe as a form of living. I guess from things I've read, I equate death with a type of egolessness. Like, for instance, one quote that really struck me is by the warrior Musashi, Miyamoto Musashi,
Hmm.
who, and I've seen other quotes of this sort, that if you want to live fearlessly and with absolute vitality, then you must live as if you're already dead.
Hmm.
Um, which, to me means drop having dropped all those many levels of protectiveness, ego protectiveness, excessive physical protectiveness,
Uh-huh.
of the ego and the self and even the body.
How did he preface it? If you want to
Basically,
live fearlessly,
yeah.
if you want to live fearlessly, it could be live or act as if you're already dead. Or if you want to live fearlessly, live as if there is no death. Would that be the same result?
I think so. It's yes, yeah, I think so. I think they're really very similar meaning there.
Hmm.
Um, and I
Right.
have, yeah, and that idea is out there in the East. I've never quite understood it because it seems outrageous in a sense.
Hmm.
That
Right.
the unreality of death. I understand the idea that we live. I guess the more Jewish idea, or maybe it's in other traditions too. We continue to live through our good deeds, through our kindness, through the good deeds we've done here in the
Yeah.
people that survive us. That's very understandable.
Yeah. That's the one thing, the one very common Jewish idea that I have never, I'm sure it's not just a Jewish idea. It's so quaint and trite. It cannot just be a Jewish idea. Um, that's left me feeling very flat. I mean,
Why?
why? Because, okay, so let's say I've done a good deed and, and then I die. And then somebody remembers, the person for whom I did the good deed remembers the good deed. I am still 100% dead. There's nothing about her memory of my good deed that will make me live on, because I think that's what we often say. They live on through. I'm 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 not have nothing to do with that memory. I mean, I made the memory perhaps, but in my current and eternal state of deadness, I'm not living on. It's just what's happening in her memory. And when she dies, for instance, if she's the only person that remembers that good deed, it's completely gone. So that doesn't work for me.
Well, I see that the way you formulate it is to say that she remembers, or somebody remembering your good deed, but I don't think that's the emphasis as in terms of being remembered, or the person remembering, as much as they may not remember, but you were a force for life.
She.
You were a force for vitality, encouragement, hope
Mhm.
in people around you, and they, as a result, have more life, more vitality, more hope.
I see. So,
You, yeah.
okay, so it's they, those who were, I'm sorry that I'm eating my breakfast. Very gauche.
Well, maybe it's appropriate for Death Pod. You're trying to grab
Gonna
some.
live. Yeah,
Yeah.
I get so hungry when I do Death Pod. Um, this, by the way, for all the listeners, is our first Death Pod. This is Death Pod 1 with Gary Stephen Spruch.
Thank you for having me as your inaugural guest.
When I really, when I put this up, I'm going to do a bio. I'm going to start. You might remember Gary Spruch as a member, as a starting member of the Dream Team. What is that? The American Olympic basketball team?
Oh, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know what Olympic.
What? Perhaps that was another life of mine.
Maybe it was. What was he going to say? Oh, so the idea of living on is the influence really that you had, that the dead person had in a positive way on those. So it could be the positive influence that that person had on others, the encouragement and so forth. It could also be the positive energy that that person just put out into the universe. Even if it's a positive, the encouragement and the strength and whatever that you're giving to that person, regardless of their memory of it, even if they've forgotten it, the possibility still exists is that when they die, that will disappear. But if it's a positive energy, because I guess we all have energy, and if it's a positive energy that someone gave to the world just while they were in it, to the Avera, the atmosphere, the environment, perhaps that never goes away. But I think that's a far cry from what you see in like, or read about in like before reciting Mourner's Kaddish in the Jewish tradition, or Yizkor, or like any other reading about death, pardon me, and memory in religious traditions. I think when they're saying they live on in the memories of others, I think that that's what they're saying.
But speaking of Kaddish, the emphasis in the Kaddish is certainly not something about human relationships, is it? When you no.
No, it's not, but it's still no. Literally, it's not. The words are not, but
Mhm,
the act is.
mhm, 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 mhm,
It's isn't it? It's 100% about relationship.
mhm.
I'm saying Kaddish for my loved one.
Right, right.
Yeah. It's
Um,
really a relational. It's interesting. Kaddish's words in Aramaic have nothing to do with memory. It's just it's praising God. Um, God being beyond all praises. It's kind of what it says.
oh, well, okay, then maybe that's a comfort to the mourner.
Yeah, maybe that is a comfort to the mourner. Yeah,
But what do you think about the idea of hiring out someone to say Kaddish? Does that have any meaning to you?
it has no meaning to me. As well, let's put it this way: if we're understanding Kaddish as a relational thing or as an obligation that a mourner has to his or her family members, immediate family members, then the hiring out would be cynical. It's just a way not to do. It's just a way not to say, not to fulfill your obligation, or to establish that relationship, or to reestablish that relationship. Because if you're hiring someone, you're just finding someone to be an agent for you, and they don't have that relationship with a dead person. But if Kaddish is really for the soul of the deceased, that they will be bound up in the bond of life in Olam Haba, in the world to come, which is also an idea about Kaddish, that it will help the person who's died go to a good place, then it makes a little more sense. It's not really about the the covenant, if you will, between the living person and the dead person who are related. You should say Kaddish for people to whom you're directly related. It's not about that relationship. It's about the soul of the deceased. And if the person who's alive is saying, I want to make sure that my loved one is remembered in Kaddish,
Yes.
or has a Kaddish dedicated to her or him, and I'll hire someone to do that, then that could make more sense, because the soul is still going to benefit from that recitation of Kaddish.
Yes, absolutely. That concept of, helping the neshama of the deceased have an aliyah.
Mm-hmm.
Does that have meaning to you?
Uh-huh. Neshama meaning soul, aliyah meaning going up and up and up. In this case, in the afterlife. Does that make sense to me? The neshama of the deceased having an aliyah, like through Kaddish. I'll say it does and it does not. As my late and dearly departed Rabbi Emeritus, Rabbi Neil Brief, would say, the more I know, the more I don't know. So there's a side of my brain, the rational side of my brain, that says, like, no, it does not. No, but there's the soul. Come on, there's so many things there that require some sort of faith. The eternality of the soul, anything that we do down here in the world of the living, in affecting in any way those who have died. The idea of souls, even if they were eternal, going having an aliyah or a yuridah, going up or down, based on whatever. Those things all require just a lot of credulousness. You have to believe a lot of things in order to get there. On the other hand, I am just very enwrapped, which is, I'm not sure that's the right word, because there's like rapture in the word enwrapped, but I'm just very tied into the tradition. And there are things that I wouldn't ordinarily believe as a Western educated, liberal American person, that I do find myself thinking, well, maybe that's possible, even if it requires a suspension of disbelief. How about you, Spruch?
Well, in line with what you're saying, I like to quote the statement that's made about the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, which are such beautiful, meaningful stories, many of them with a really strong ethical content. If you believe them, you're a fool. If you don't believe them, you're a much bigger fool. I think there's a lot to that, and it could be applied here too, because there is, of course, we don't have to accept lock, stock, and barrel everything our tradition teaches us, but I think many of us understand that there is an essential wisdom and sanity in so much of what our Jewish tradition has to say. And for instance, putting that saying to the stories of the Baal Shem Tov, there's so much to learn if you just automatically reject them from a rationalist, enlightened perspective. You're missing so much, and the knowledge from our sacred texts is not like it's not like facts in a telephone book. It's something very different than that.
Right.
We have to bring in reason, of course, but to use reason to reject so many teachings about the soul, the unconscious, is excessive.
Listen, final quick topic. When you die, when one dies, the way you're describing it, that egolessness, with no body, there's no ego. I think that's kind of like the idea that once you're done with the body, once the soul is done with the body, there's no ego, because the body is like the source of that ego, the wants of the body, the the desires. So are we done with our bodies when we die?
Uh, I, I know, this is another topic. I know that I don't exactly fully understand, but I know that, as we've discussed, the tremendous importance that Judaism places on the on the dead body, which is, as I've mentioned, I respect it, and perhaps it's a form of humanism, to give such tremendous respect to the remains.
Mm-hmm.
But
Mm-hmm.
it's a little bit hard for me to grasp, because of course,
Right.
I understand that the body should be treated with respect, but Judaism really goes all out, apparently, on valuing and burying the dead body. And I don't know how far it goes in seeing the dead body as a,
Oh, it goes pretty far. In other words, it goes as far as saying it's going to come back. That bodily resurrection in the end, in the ultimate end for all of us, that there'll be a bodily resurrection. They'll be clanked back together, our bones. Um, that's pretty far.
yeah, that is.
Yeah.
And that's
You can't get much farther than that, I
it.
don't think.
Going all the way. Yeah, that's a little hard for me to grasp.
That's hard for me to grasp too. Although Ezekiel makes that very vivid in, I think it was Ezekiel 37, with the Valley of the Dry Bones and them being revivified, muscles and tendons and flesh being put back on them,
It,
you
but,
know.
but let me ask you, I know that the Rambam, I
Yeah.
believe, made that a tenet of
Yes.
Jewish belief, but beyond the Rambam and his tenets, do you know if that, to what extent bodily resurrection is considered absolutely fundamental or not to Jewish belief?
By the way, Beyond the Rambam would be another good name for a good podcast. Beyond the Rambam.
Oh,
The Rambam is Maimonides, the 12th century great Jewish philosopher.
oh, I had another name for your podcast. I have no idea if it makes any sense, but I kept thinking about it.
Uh-huh.
Death be not proud. I don't think it makes any sense.
Doesn't make any sense, but it is fun to, yeah, it definitely resonates with people, perhaps more than the Death Pod. So maybe whether that's fundamental, I don't know. I don't know. I mean, it's still fundamental. It's in the Yigdal. I mean, it's something that we are singing and affirming all the time. But I would say the vast majority of Jews do not believe that. But I think there are lots of things that we say in our tradition and our prayers and whatever that we don't really believe. But that's for Beyond the Rambam podcast. But I think I mean, I think in the Orthodox world, that would be a fundamental tenet that is. See, my door open behind me. It looks like it's a ghost, but it's really my dog.
Oh, wow.
My dog, who is 15 years old. So speaking of which, all right, Spruch, I thank you so much.
It's been a pleasure to be part of the Death Pod, Rabbi Weil.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Appreciate that.
And
I always appreciate speaking with you.
likewise, we've talked at many, many things over the years. Many, many, many things.
Yes.
And now this.
Marshall Money had enough of all the urban jangle, so he told himself one day.